hope you're all having a great day. I wanted to talk about this subject, but it's been something that I've been wanting to talk about a lot because it comes up a lot in my sessions with my clients, and I see it a lot in various parenting groups that I'm in. And I think my hesitance came from not wanting to appear as if I'm shaming or blaming parents for the state of their family, and yet we need to address the fact that if you're in a toxic relationship with your partner and there are children in the household, that there's just no way that these children aren't impacted by the relationship dynamics that you two are in. So we need to talk about that, but we need to talk about it in a way that doesn't involve shaming and blaming. And the reason why I feel like I want to talk about this is because I have my own journey that I can talk about, so that hopefully you'll know that I'm not trying to just point fingers and be like, look, you're screwing up your kids or whatever. But we have to acknowledge what being in that environment will do to your children and to anyone in, or any being in that environment, right? Whether it's, your pets or your children, or maybe you, like in our case, we have my mom living with us. And so we need to acknowledge that that creates an energy within your household that's not healthy. Right? So even if you think you've managed to hide a lot of, what's really going on between you and your partner, spouse, the energy is still there and it's felt, right? We're energetic beings. We feel our environment. And I hope that doesn't sound like woo-hoo, because that's just proven by science, right? We are impacted by our environment, and the people in it. So if we want to look at it in a more compassionate way, I think it's important that we talk about it, and talk about our experiences. So I've talked about various dynamics of my relationship with Donnie. We've been together for 31 years. I think it's 32 this September. We were very young when we met, 19 and 20. And so we grew up a lot together. We had to, build some emotional intelligence. We had to mature. And, because now we know that the human brain isn't fully developed until the age of 25, that the part of the brain that's needed for reasoning and logical thinking hasn't even fully formed. So when we met, we were just children, really. We took on adult responsibilities. Like, we bought our first house when I was 24, he was 25. So we were working and he was going to university and stuff. And there was just, a lot of adult things that we took on that we had no clue what we were doing, from a practical sense of home ownership and all of that stuff, and just, paying all of the bills and all of that. That was a lot, without really having much clue of what we were doing. And then just from the emotional standpoint, we waited 4 years after we got married before we got pregnant. So it's not like we didn't have time to get to know each other and build that foundation of trust. The problem is that we were both still very immature, just from an emotional standpoint. So yes, we were adulting on certain levels, right? We were building a life together. We had bought a house. We planned our family. He went and got a job after university, yada, yada, yada. We were doing the right things and managing to adult. But from an emotional standpoint, we really, we're lacking in a lot of things. And then, of course, this was impacting our relationship with each other. But then you throw children into the mix, and we're dealing with a lot of emotional stuff that we didn't have the capacity to deal with. And so, we both agreed that we weren't going to be physical with our children. That was something that we both felt very strongly about and agreed upon before we even had children. So that was easy. What was hard, though, was knowing how to parent in a way that was different from the way our parents had parented us, because we weren't shown that. And so it took me on a journey of like exploring gentle parenting and stuff like that. And so I kind of knew the kind of parent I wanted to be, but because of my own dysregulated state a lot of times, and being in that fight, flight, freeze response so very much in those years, a lot of times I couldn't consistently put into practice those types of parenting practices that I really felt deeply that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a gentle parent. I wanted to, try to meet my kids at their level. So what really changed for us, because I want to be clear, we didn't fix this overnight. It wasn't like we just automatically became better people and better parents. Our relationship didn't suddenly become better. What happened for us is that we got resources. We were given help at the right time in the right ways, that we were able to change the trajectory of our whole family, because individually we got help in different ways, and as a family we got help. So when I talk about this from a personal standpoint and then from a professional standpoint, I know that it's hard to get those resources, because I spent a good portion of my children's childhood begging and asking for the type of resources that we needed. Unfortunately, in the system the way it is, at that point, the resources that we really needed weren't available to us. I'm not sure how available they are now to younger families in a way that would be really impactful. But what happened for us was that we got individual therapy, and it happened to coincide with doing DBT skills group as a family, and my kids getting individual therapy. So all of us were getting therapy, and then as a family we were doing this DBT skills group through the IWK, which is our children's hospital here, and that, like, all of that combined helped change the course of our family. And so what my kids would have seen throughout their childhood were two flawed people who loved each other, who struggled with staying within their window of tolerance, who were often dysregulated and triggered, and below that, just there would have been a sense of love and solidness. But as children, I don't know that they could have sensed that part, right? So they would have seen a lot of and heard a lot of dysregulation. And so that's what we were modeling for them at that time, and that's what they were taking on board. It affected their mental health. And so part of my journey also was dealing with sort of the guilt of the part that we played. And so I'm not going to take ownership for all of it, but we created that environment, and it was up to us to fix it. So what our children saw through that journey is two people who were dedicated to fixing it. And we might not have always gotten it right, and we didn't always have the right tools. We were fumbling around a lot. It was messy and it was really crappy, and yet it's funny because I think back to an experience we had as a family. This was a different family group dynamic thing that they were doing with us through public health. But we were being observed as a family by other clinicians behind a glass. I think back and I'm just like so cringed by it. However, we were desperate. We were looking for help in any corner, avenue, any place that we could find it, and we didn't have a lot of money, so we had sort of spent what we could privately, and then when that sort of ran out, we obviously tried to avail ourselves of what was available in the public system, and at that time it was this group thing. Anywho, my point of it is that one of the observations that was made to us after they observed us over a number of weeks, as this group of different clinicians that ranged from psychiatrists to psychologists to social workers and maybe some nurses, I don't know. However, one of the comments that was made was that although we really struggled with communication, as a family, we used humor as a way of connecting, and that it was actually really beautiful, and that there was a desire amongst each of us within the family unit to connect and stay connected or find a way to connect in healthier ways. So, obviously, the takeaway from that is, although the whole experience wasn't that helpful, those words were, because I'm talking about it now years later, because they were true, and at least it gave me some hope. Because I think that if you can find the sort of the nuggets of hope, but hope isn't enough. Hope isn't going to fix your relationship. And what my kids would have observed throughout all of it is this at least consistent effort on both of our parts to come together, to try to figure this out, to try to make this work, to get better, to try to, fix things. So at least they saw that. But if you're in a toxic relationship where, if you were to step back a moment and imagine yourself looking in on your family dynamic, if what your children are probably seeing is two people who have reached, relationship burnout, in that you're either fighting all the time and picking away at each other, or maybe you're doing the passive aggressive thing and not talking to each other and finding little ways to get little digs in or whatever, or just, not being loving towards each other in any kind of way. You've reached that burnout point. If the observation would also show that only one person in that relationship is actively trying to change the dynamics of the relationship, they're going to see that this is what love is that one person pours everything into the relationship while the other person does little to help things and maybe actively be dismantling things, right? So, and I know that's hard, and I want to be clear, because I've talked about this before in relation in other videos that I've done when I've talked about toxic relationships and relationships with narcissists, is that there are some times when I totally recognize that for safety reasons you feel like you can't leave, for financial reasons you feel like you can't leave, for a lot of reasons you feel like you can't leave, and maybe the biggest one is that you're lacking in support. And so I recognize that, and I really want to be clear that I'm not shaming you or blaming you for staying in circumstances where you feel like you don't have any other choice. I just would like for the people listening to this, that if you're in a relationship where, if it's at all possible for you to put yourself first and put your children's well-being first, if you're able to do that in a way that allows you to create some space safely, If you're able to, avail yourself of resources, whatever that might be for you locally, to help you with the practical things of leaving, whether that's your family or some community groups, the whatever government funding available, and I recognize that in this day and age that those are hard to come by too. So I always want to be clear that I recognize that there's a lot of reasons why people stay in toxic relationships, and I'm not trying to just pile on more. Like, oh yeah, I know you're already feeling incredibly terrible and exhausted and beaten down and sad and in grief about your relationship, and now I'm going to make you feel guilty about how it's impacting your children. That's not my intention. So, and like I said, I think the only reason we were able to turn it around was because we eventually did get the right resources at the right time. And that's what inspired me to do what I do. So it inspired me to go back and get some more education, take a course or two or three or a few, to upgrade my skills, to be able to help people manage the feelings and emotions around being in toxic relationships or having come out of toxic relationships, to help them become or get back to that person inside of themselves who is strong and is resilient and is, able to feel joy and to feel balanced. And because that's where the journey took me. But even before I was able to get the help that I got, along the way, I have been on a growth journey, a spiritual journey, an emotional healing journey through my yoga and meditation and all of that stuff. And I'm happy to share all of those things with people freely. But what really sort of spurred me to do the work that I do and talk about the things that I talk about is that I felt the healing that can take place inside of me. And I'm not perfect, and I'm not saying that I don't still get triggered at times, that my adult children don't sometimes still see that older version of myself that sometimes pops up, right? Because again, like when I talk about the patterns that we can get caught in, that's what I'm talking about. The trigger happens. It creates a cascade of events or feelings or sensations within you, and behaviors that then are around that, and you get caught in that loop. The difference now is that my children see if I do get triggered, and I do sometimes, if I'm hangry, if I'm tired and hungry, if I'm dysregulated in other ways, like if I'm physically hurt in some ways, it really lowers my my ability to self-regulate and to cope with stress and emotions, right? So I recognize those parts of myself, and I give myself a lot of compassion for when those times happen, because I also know now that I can get through to the other side much more quickly because I recognize what's going on inside of me, and I'm able to bring a lot of compassion and care to myself in those situations. And then that allows me to have conversations with my children that not only apologize if I need to for behaving or saying things inappropriately, or that were wrong for the situation or hurtful in some way. If I'm apologizing, I'm owning my behavior, and I might also explain why I was in that state and how I worked my way through it, to see their side of things, to understand what they were saying and trying to get me to hear, maybe, or their feelings or whatever. And so then I'm able to validate their experience and really show them that I've done the work to get to that point of being able to hear them and acknowledge them, right? So that didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a flick of the switch. However, the reason why I do the work that I do specifically is because it was quicker than most other modalities that I had tried, and much more helpful in the way that I needed to be helped at that time, which was I needed to understand what was triggering me and causing me to be in those near constant state of fight, flight, freeze that was keeping me from enjoying, my life, my relationship with my spouse and my children, that was really holding me back from even really pursuing my passions like yoga and meditation as an instructor, teacher, and then as a helper healer in this dynamic, that I'm in now, right? So it really just had like a domino effect that happened quite quickly. So I'm like, okay, I need to be able to share this with other people. And so that's why I do what I do. That's why I talk about this stuff so much. And that's why I'm willing to be a little bit vulnerable here and talk about my own experiences, because I see it in so many of my clients and in so many of these Facebook groups and whatnot of just, mostly I'm talking to women. That tends to be my my audience for the most part, but I am talking to all parents regardless of, what that looks like and what your family dynamic looks like. If you're a caregiver of children and you're in a toxic relationship with the other person who's also a caregiver, then you need to really ask yourself, is this fixable? Can we turn this ship around? Do the two of us want to work together to make that happen, because we recognize how detrimental continuing on this path will be, not only to ourselves, but to our children. And how do we do that? Where do we get the resources for that? Or maybe it's time to recognize that even though you'll still have to co-parent with this person if you were to live in separate residences, you individually will no longer be dealing with the constant stress of being in a relationship that is so detrimental to your mental health. And when you can distance yourself from that and give yourself that time and space to breathe, it often allows for resources to be more helpful when you're able to avail yourself of them, and if they are available to you, right? So please reach out if you have any questions, if you'd like to chat, if you'd like to share with me privately. You can private message me, and please know that you're not alone. There's a lot of families out there struggling and trying to figure out how to turn their ship around, how to get on a different path that, maybe involves breaking some generational trauma and some built-in cycles, and maybe it involves doing your own deep dive into developmental trauma and child development, and I really invite you to do that. Dr. Dan Siegel is a great resource for that. Dr. Gabor Mate is a great resource. From a parenting perspective, Dr. Gordon Neufeld and Dr. Gabor Mate's book, Hold On to Your Kids. That's a great resource to understand how we can change the dynamics in our family. We need to understand, I think, a little bit more about how we work, how as individuals we developed in this way, what makes us tick, what triggers us, what ways we can learn to self-regulate, and just that deeper understanding of ourselves, and then how that relates to being in a relationship with another person romantically, and how that relates to being a parent, right? And how changing that, knocking that one domino over can impact all of your relationships in a much more positive way. So that if you're looking for that kind of support, for the mental health piece of it, for, trying to figure out what's underlying, because a lot of the things that you're dealing with are often symptoms of deeper issues that need to be addressed, right? So, I'm a big believer in researching, in understanding human development and the way that we grow and develop, and flourish, and in the ways that we grow and develop that sort of stunt that growth. And how do we move from one to the other is really where I, find a lot of passion for what I do. So please feel free to reach out. I hope if any of this resonates with you, that you'll feel free to, talk about your own journey and share, because I know for a long time I didn't share with very many people what was going on inside of our relationship, inside of our household. And I think I cut myself off from a lot of community support that I might have gotten, just in friends and family, if I had been able to open up more about it. But again, that's where the shame and blame come in. And so that's why I wanted to share a little bit about our story. And I don't think that we're entirely unique. I think that, there's a lot of people struggling out there with, with their own self-regulation, and it's spilling over into a lot of their relationships, including parenting. So thank you for joining me. Namaste.